After e4, c5, knight f3, e6, white continues now with knight c3. So this is how I suggest to continue. We're going to try to create a very simple setup against a defense that can see millions of lines, and that's just going to be very annoying. What we're going to do is like just basic moves that are very easy to remember. So now there's many variations and we will go through all of them. Popular moves will be like stuff like a6, or even knight to c6, d6, or d5, knight f6, queen f7, knight e7, and everything. Let's look at the immediate knight c6, one of the most popular moves. So white continues with the classical d4, pawn takes, obviously, knight takes back. And now two main lines we're going to look at is queen to c7 and queen to b6. Queen to b6 is immediately punished by knight to b5. As a matter of fact, remember, when black in this specific opening plays e6, alright, so that creates a hole in d6 and it's targetable by the knight, so that means that the move a6 is mandatory. So as soon as you see black playing the knight early variation, which is not wrong for black to be honest, because a6 can come one move later, but when black wastes one more tempo and doesn't play a6, you can go knight b5, targeting the weakness, trying to win the bishop pair from your opponent already. Knight d5 punishes the opponent. What happens if black plays a6 right now? This is met by bishop e3. Attacking the queen will have to move, and let's say queen a5 for instance. Then we can do knight e6 check, and of course moving the king here will give a terrible scenario for black. We all know why. So bishop takes, queen takes back, and now we are preventing the black player from castling. So black will have to play, he can't play knight f6 and then castle because he will not be able to. So after knight e7, which is protected by the other knight, so the opponent thinks he can castle, white can do a long castle, and the development of the white player is excellent. Got the bishop pair, queen and rook on an open file. Black only has one bishop, which is completely stuck, so it's a useless bishop. So white is doing much better here. So after castling, white's best move now is a3. But it's also because it's kind of preparing us for the inevitable b5, which is thematic in this situation. b5, b4, which is annoying. That would be the best way to develop the bishop. So after a3, anyway, b5, white's best move is bishop to c5, which puts more control over the square b4 and prevents the black player, at least for the moment, to break everything on the queen side. So plenty of moves now are available. One that I'm going to go through, but it doesn't make much difference from all the others, is knight to g6. The black player has to start breathing with these pieces, because at the moment he can't move this knight without losing this other knight, and also he can't move the bishop because the queen is putting pressure on d7. So after knight to g6, which also protects the rook, white continues with h4. I mean, any other move would have been met pretty much similar way. And now, of course, we want to go ahead and harass this knight and get the rook to become powerful. So after, let's say, h5, how do we meet this type of idea? g4, right? Clearly, we know the reason. It's fine to give up a pawn if that opens a file for the rook. So g4 here is completely winning for white, because if black takes, then we can keep pushing the pawn, and then it's going to be, the attack is too strong and we have the bishop pair, queen is very active, black has got no counteraction. So what happens if after h4 black plays, let's say, bishop b7 and gives up this pawn? The idea is to get the bishop on a very strong diagonal bothering our rook. Let's see how to carry on such attack. h5, and now knight g goes to e5, clearly defending. It's defended by the knight. How do we carry on such attack? Well, f4 now is necessary. The knight has to move again. Where? Knight c4 is the move that everyone is thinking. Somebody probably thinking knight g4 with the idea of going to f2. But f2 is guarded by this bishop, right? So after knight to c4, attacking the queen, which is fair enough, also getting the knight much closer to our king. It's a typical move in such a scenario. We have to take it. So we give up the bishop pair as well. But the situation is compromised because white's attack on the king side has started, and now white concludes with h6. Clearly, taking would be nonsensical. Every chess player that is following this video now clearly knows unless they're a super beginner. So after g6, and also leaving the pawn in g7 wouldn't have been good because white has two active rooks. They would have had a clear way to h7, even if the pawn in g7 wouldn't have been powerful. So anyway, white continues with f5, and the game's gonna be over very soon because there's this weakness on the dark squares. After the best move, the most defensive move, which is queen d8, best thing to do here is to simplify everything because white doesn't have a win in this situation, not straight away. So simply queen takes and then play a very easy endgame with active rooks and more material. So from the start, after e6, and then we just play the two knights against this opening. Knight c6, and now we do the central swap, which I rarely suggest in every other Sicilian line, but in this one I kind of do because it's not a good one. So earlier we went through queen b6, let's try queen c7. The idea now is to continue like this, usual way. And of course, in this case, knight b5 is not recommendable because the queen can go to b8, and from b8, both the queen and the bishop will be guarding d6. So the attack of the white player with the knight going to d6, supported by the queen, is not enough, and a6 will successfully kick our knight away, and so queen c7 is more accurate than queen b6. So bishop e3 is the move to continue. Okay, so now let's go on through two typical patterns that might be a bit confusing right now because a lot of players might play it by heart and they don't know what's going on. Bishop c5 here, for instance, looks like a completely normal move. If knight takes, then queen takes, the queen will be protecting the bishop, or even the bishop can even just take. However, the best move now is knight to b5, which attacks the queen, and then the queen will have to move. And whatever the queen moves will be able to take. So let's say, okay, queen d6 is not accessible because of the knight, and the queen a5 or queen b8 or queen d8 will lose track of the bishop, but the bishop will be taken. So after queen to b6, which is the only square where the queen still protects the bishop, we're still going to take the bishop anyway because then we have access to the square c7. So in this scenario, instead of bishop c5, which is a blunder, black can play bishop b4, and this is a typical move in this scenario, and it makes perfect sense. The idea is to give up the bishop for this knight and create double isolated pawn, which is a long-term weakness. So that's fair enough. Bishop b4 is met by this crucial move, typical in such a scenario when black has this French pawn in e6. Queen to g4, the dark square bishop has gone, so the queen is putting pressure on g7. So what's happening now after g6, safeguarding the g7 square? There could have been other moves as well, but none of them very well. And if you study the videos about what to do against the Vinever French, you can find them on my channel or any other videos on YouTube with such a scenario. You will see how to crush such an ugly king pawn structure when the dark square bishop is gone. After g6, knight to b5 attacks the queen. And now two main moves, the queen going either to e5 or to b8. Queen a5 will be met simply by long castle. The knight is defending the knight in c3, and also we are unpinning the knight in c3. And white's advantage is considered as +3 since the dark squares of the black players are terrible, and the only bishop left is this really silly bishop. And even if black doesn't swap the dark square bishop after white castles long side, anyway, the control that white has over the square d6 is crucial to remove this strong dark square bishop and then clamp on the dark squares afterwards when the rook will be defending d6. So we all know that. So that's why let's just look at these two ideas. So queen e5 is met by bishop f4, winning the control of this diagonal forever. And after queen e4 check, that was the idea basically. Well, the knight is pinned. White wins the game by playing king to d1. And now it's still too late for black to develop anymore. There's too many threats. White is threatening knight to c7. And so after bishop to c3, for instance, knight d6 wins the queen. So the idea that black could have of taking the knight to misplace, or at least to retreat, to force a retreat of the white knight in b5 doesn't work. There are no checks available for black, so the game ends like that. too many threats. So in this scenario, we tried queen e5, which loses, and because you know, one thing I think is necessary in the videos, the reason why I make videos the way I do it is because I don't believe in learning theory at all. Although you can argue that this is some sort of theory. Well, no, because we're discussing the position of the pieces and how much sense it makes to place specific moves. So of course it's impossible to ask anyone to remember after queen e5 that the move here is bishop f4, because I think here we are at move 9 or 10 or something. This is not about remembering, it's about remember the patterns. So there's a pawn in d7, a pawn in e6, a pawn in f7. This is all very stupid. Just like this defense, this Sicilian with e6 defense is a stupid defense. This bishop here is not going anywhere, and there's a weakness on the dark square. So bishop f4 is a typical move to remember in such scenarios, which occur in so many other lines, not just against this Sicilian. Even in the Caro-Kann, this could be the tremendous bishop. However, let's just quickly discuss queen to b8 now. Now, what to continue now? And the next move is a bit surprising. It's queen g3, we're looking for a swap. The idea is why? This, again, is not something to remember, but rather to understand, just like everything else in chess. A swap here will be favorable for white simply because black has, through this pawn structure, black has surrendered the dark squares. So this knight here is a monster. They would be targeting the dark squares and winning the game. So a swap is favorable. And if black doesn't want to swap, well, we will see. Let's try this move now. Bishop c3. I'm sure many of us are wondering, bishop c3 is probably a good move because it creates a long-term weakness. Well, we can even take back with the knight, and it looks like right now we don't have that control over the dark squares with a strong knight in b5 anymore. But the thing is, we can go back to b5 anyway, unless black wants to play a6. But we are much ahead in development, and we have the bishop pair and a massive control over the dark squares. So after knight to f6 now, for instance, if black doesn't want to swap, well, if black does, then remember our advantage is huge. We can take back with the h pawn, control this file forever. So after knight f6, let's look at this idea. Queen h4, targeting the knight. And after queen e5, white wins the same typical scenario, bishop f4. And soon enough, the rook is coming to d1 and so on. So queen e5 is no good. What happens after instead? King e7, we can't push the pawn because it's that e5 is protected by black pieces. White continues with bishop to g5 very simply, and after queen e5, white doesn't play bishop f4 because we want to keep the pin, and just plays pawn to f4, and queen to d4 is the only way to keep protecting the knight. But now rook to d1, as mentioned before in a similar scenario. So here again, instead of queen e5 or king e7, what happens after the more normal looking move, knight to h5? Now white will castle. Look how fluid and excellent the development is for the white player. And after black finally castles, getting some king safety for the moment, white continues with bishop e2, idea of smashing everything on the king side and winning very easily. Black goes on with knight to g7, only move, and now bishop to c5, controlling this square so well. Rook to e8, and now bishop to d6. So that's how you punish that mistake. And there were no other options anyway.